Discussions with the Creationist Part 3. Humans evolved from rocks.
Do you really think that humans evolved from a rock 4.6 billion years ago? I can demonstrate that this is what is taught in the high school and college textbooks about evolution. And I'd be curious to see if you believe it. If not, please explain.
Humans evolved from their ancestors. If you go back in time to the beginning of life, abiogenesis, then nobody knows exactly what happened. The little evidence that we have shows that it is possible that life was made from non-living things, but this hypothesis hasn't been shown in a lab yet.
You did not answer my questions. I'll try one more time, and if you keep this up, I'm gonna have to cut off the conversation, unfortunately, because I've had a lot of evolutionists contact me with the same generic story, refusing to answer my questions. Here's the question again. I can demonstrate that the high school and college textbooks teach that according to the evolution theory, we ultimately come from a rock 4.6 billion years ago. Do you really think that humans evolved from a rock 4.6 billion years ago? Either you do believe that or you don't. If you don't, then I asked for your explanation because I want to understand your point of view, to use your phrasing. If you don't want to share that, that's fine. But I just don't have the time to waste with email debate. I'm making a lot of new material and I have public presentations scheduled in the next 3 months. I just can't spend forever waiting on answer to simple questions.
I didn't answer your question because it made no sense. I do not believe that living things evolved from rocks simply because rocks are not alive. I explained to you that you're confusing evolution with abiogenesis. The correct question is, do you believe that life started off in rocks 4.6 billion years ago? What I wrote originally is an answer to this question. I can also ask questions that make no sense. Like, do you really believe that God created the world in just 12 days?
Faulty analogy. You cannot show me where in the Bible it teaches 12 days. I can show you in the textbooks where it teaches we all came from a rock.
Okay, faulty analogy. But I could ask, do you really believe that God created the world in just 6,000 years? Then I would have a good bad question. Peter 3:8 says, a day is equal to 1,000 years for God. There are hypotheses about life starting off inside clay, and that's probably what the textbooks you're talking about are saying.
Clay, crystals, rocks. It rained on the rocks for millions of years, turned them into soup, and the soup became alive. You finally answered it, just indirectly. Your answer is no, you do not believe it. From your explanation, you don't believe it because it sounds stupid. I agree. Darwin didn't write a book called How Species Change Over Time. He wrote a book called The Origin of Species.
The title you mentioned would be more precise, I agree. The book isn't titled The Origin of Life either. You're just being fussy again.
If you don't have a theory going back to the beginning, then you don't have a coherent theory. Even Darwin knew that. How can there be a theory about life without a theory about how life began?
This is certainly not a big issue for Darwin or for me. For example, the outsourced contractor who wrote the user manual for Microsoft Word has no idea who made it or how it was made, but he still wrote his manual. He observed the software until he could figure out a working model, and he documented his model. I don't see what the problem is.
Again, I can show you the textbooks do teach that abiogenesis is part of the theory, and that it is being taught as part of science and part of the evolution theory. Evolutionists have only begun to back off from it in the past couple decades because the scientific evidence is heavily against it. Do you believe that a dog can come from something non-dog, even though that's never been observed? If not, please explain.
Similarly, dogs came from more primitive dog ancestors. There is evidence to show this.
You didn't answer my question. I asked you if you believe that the dog came from something that was non-dog. I want you to look at the picture on the website real carefully. All of these are the dog kind. Sometimes you get big dogs, sometimes you get little dogs, but it's still a dog.
Your second question is also wrong. It's like asking, in the color spectrum, is orange the color immediately before yellow? This question is ridiculous because there's a whole bunch of colors yellow and a whole bunch of colors between yellow and orange. Your question is also fallacious. If I answer yes, I sound stupid, and if I answer no, I sound like I agree with you. The right question is, were dogs always around, or did they evolve from more primitive forms?
Yeah, I can already tell you're wasting my time. You know that at some point in your geologic record, something that could be labeled as a dog has to appear. You don't want to answer the question because you're right, it is ridiculous to think that dogs come from something non-dog, and then to call that science? You're proving true what I said earlier. The Bible and science show us that there are genetic limits to the changes. Evolutionism teaches that there are no genetic limits, which those who follow that religion take it purely by faith.
The limits of evolutionary changes, as you say, are only limits within your own mind. Just because you can't possibly imagine the changes in life over 1,000,000 years doesn't mean it didn't happen. Evidence shows that we evolved from more primitive forms of life that are different than us. For example, we have deactivated genes that are kept in our DNA. What happens when they get reactivated? When I have evidence like this, I don't need no faith.
I said, if no, please explain. That doesn't mean you agree with me. You're starting up an email debate and I don't have the time for it. You want to schedule a public debate? That's different. I live in Indiana and can't afford to travel too far. But if you live around the area and want to schedule something public, we can work that out.
Evolution works in small steps. A dog's parents look mostly like the dog, but its DNA differs slightly. If you go back in time 10,000 years, the ancestor would be somewhat different. If you go back 1,000,000 years, it will be very different. This is similar to the color spectrum example.
Eventually in the color spectrum, something orange must appear before yellow at some point. At some point, a dog must appear. Now you believe that religiously because you have no evidence that something non-dog produces a dog kind, dog, wolf, coyote, etc., and at the same time don't want to admit it. This is wasting my time.
You keep saying there's no evidence, we can't observe evolution, blah blah. I've already given you evidence and you keep ignoring it. Let's try this again. Evidence. I can make a new species in a lab easily. Granted, this would take too much time with a dog. So I can do it with things that reproduce quickly, like algae and bacteria. I challenge you to try it out yourself. First, let's agree that a single-celled organism is a different kind or species than multicelled, aka colonies. In a lab, you can easily produce algae colonies from individual cells, equivalent to dog from non-dog. This is straight evolution in a lab. If you don't want to take this challenge, then stop saying there's no evidence.